So today we're going to discuss about describing learners or how learners differ from each other and what are those factors that make them different from one another. Okay? So the first factor would be the age of the learners. So the age of our students is a major factor in our decisions about how and what to teach. People of different ages have different needs, competencies, competences, and cognitive skills. We might expect children of primary age to acquire much of a foreign language through play, for example, whereas for adults, we can reasonably expect a greater use of abstract thought. One of the most common beliefs about age and language learning is that young children learn faster and more effectively than any other age group. Most people can think of examples which appear to bear this out, as when children move to a new country and appear to pick up a new language with remarkable ease. However, as we shall see, this is not always true of children in that situation, and the story of child language facility may be something of a myth. It is certainly true that children who learn a new language early have a facility with a pronunciation which is sometimes denied older learners. Lynn Cameron suggests that children reproduce the accent of their teachers with deadly accuracy. Apart from pronunciation ability, however, it appears that older children, that is, children from about the age of 12, seem to be far better learners than younger ones in most aspects of acquisition, pronunciation excluded. Patsy Lightbone and Nina Spada, reviewing the literature on the subject, point to the various studies showing that older children and adolescents make more progress than younger learners. The relative superiority of older children as language learners, especially in formal educational settings, may have something to do with their increased cognitive abilities, which allow them to benefit from more abstract approaches to language teaching. It may also have something to do with the way younger children are taught. Lynn Cameron suggests that teachers of young learners need to be especially alert and adaptive in the responsive tasks and have to be able to adjust activities on the spot. It is not being suggested that young children cannot acquire second languages successfully. As we have already said, many of them achieve significant competence, especially in bilingual situations. But in learning situations, teenagers are often more effective learners. Yet, English is increasingly being taught at younger and younger ages. This may have great benefits in terms of citizenship, democracy, tolerance, and multiculturalism, for example, but especially when there is ineffective transfer of skills and methodology from primary to secondary school, early learning does not always appear to offer the substantial success often claimed for it. Nor is it true that older learners are necessarily ineffective language learners. Research has shown that they can reach high levels of proficiency in their second language. They may have greater difficulty in approximating native speaker pronunciation than children do, but sometimes this is a deliberate or even subconscious retention of their cultural and linguistic identity. In what follows, we will consider students at different ages, as if all the members of each age group are the same. Yet, each student is an individual with different experiences, both in and outside the classroom. Comments here about young children, teenagers, and adults can only be generalizations. Much also depends upon individual learner differences and upon motivation. First, we'll have young children. Young children, especially those up to the ages of 9 or 10, learn differently from older children, adolescents, and adults in the following ways. So, first, they respond to meaning even if they do not understand individual words. Second, They often learn indirectly rather than directly. That is, they take in information from all sides, learning from everything around them rather than only focusing on the precise topic they are being taught. Their understanding comes not just from explanation, but also from what they see and hear, and crucially have a chance to touch and interact with. They find abstract concepts such as grammar rules difficult to grasp. They generally display an enthusiasm for learning and a curiosity about the world around them. They have a need for individual attention and approval from the teacher. They are also keen to talk about themselves and respond well to learning that uses themselves and their own lives as main topics in the classroom. Lastly, they have a limited attention span. Unless activities are extremely engaging, they can get easily bored, losing interest after 10 minutes or so. It is important when discussing young learners to take account of changes which take place within this varied and varying age span. Various theorists have described the way that children develop and the various ages and stages they go through. So we have already discussed from our past discussions about Piaget, but as a review, Piaget suggested that children start at the sensory motor stage and then proceed through the intuitive stage and the concrete operational stage before finally reaching the formal operational stage where abstraction becomes increasingly possible. Second, we also have Leo Vygotsky. So he emphasized the place of social interaction in development and the role of a knower providing scaffolding to help a child who has entered the zone of proximal development. So when we say zone of proximal development or ZPD, this is where they are ready to learn new things. Both Eric Erikson and Abraham Maslow saw development as being closely bound up in the child's confidence and self-esteem, while Ruben Forstein suggested that children's cognitive structures are infinitely modifiable with the help of a modifier, much like Vygotsky's knower. But however, we described the way children develop, and though there are significant differences between, say, a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old, we can make some recommendations about younger learners in general. That is, children up about 10 and 11. In the first place, good teachers at this level need to provide a rich diet of learning experiences, which encourage their students to get information from a variety of sources. They need to work with their students individually and in groups, developing good and effective relationships. They need to plan a range of activities for a given time period and be flexible enough to move on to the next exercise when they see their students getting bored. So teachers of young learners need to spend time understanding how their students think and operate. They need to be able to pick up on their students' current interests so that they can use them to motivate the children. And they also need good oral skills in English, since speaking and listening are the skills which will be used most of all at this age. The teacher's pronunciation really matters here too, precisely because, as we have said, children imitate it so well. All of this reminds us that once a decision has been taken to teach English to younger learners, there is a need for highly skilled and dedicated teaching. This may well be the most difficult but rewarding age to teach. But when teachers do it well and the conditions are right, there is no reason why students should not defy some of the research results we mentioned above and be highly successful learners, provided, of course, that this success is followed up as they move to a new school or a grade. We can also draw some conclusions about what a classroom for young children should look like and what might be going on in it. First of all, we will want the classroom to be bright and colorful, with windows the children can see out of. and with enough room for different activities to be taking place. We might expect the students to be working in groups in different parts of the classroom, changing their activity every 10 minutes or so. We are obviously, Susan Halliwell writes, not talking about classrooms where children spend all their time sitting still in rows or talking only to the teacher. Because children love discovering things, and because they respond well to being asked to use their imagination, they may well be involved in puzzle like activities, in making things, in drawing things, in games and physical movement, or in songs. A good primary classroom mixes play and learning in an atmosphere of cheerful and supportive harmony. Next, we have adolescents. So it is strange that despite their relative success as language learners, adolescents are often seen as problem students. Yet, with their greater ability for abstract thought and their passionate commitment to what they are doing once they are engaged, adolescents may well be the most exciting students of all. Most of them understand the need for learning, and with the right goals, can be responsible enough to do what is asked of them. It is perfectly true that there are times when things don't seem to go very well. Adolescence is bound up, after all, with a pronounced search for identity and a need for self esteem. Adolescents need to feel good about themselves and valued. All of this is reflected in the secondary student who convincingly argued that a good teacher is someone who knows our names. But it's not just teachers, of course. Teenage students often have an acute need for peer approval too, or at the very least, are extremely vulnerable to the negative judgments of their own age group. There is almost nothing more exciting than a class of involved young people at this age pursuing learning goal with enthusiasm. Our job as teachers, therefore, must be to provoke student engagement with material which is relevant and involving. At the same time, we need to do what we can to bolster our students' self esteem and be conscious always of their need for identity. Herbert Puchta and Michael Strach see problems with teenagers as resulting in part from the teacher's failure to build bridges between what they want and have to teach and their students' worlds of thought and experience. They advocate linking language teaching far more closely to the students' everyday interests through, in particular, the use of humanistic teaching. They must be encouraged to respond to text and situations with their own thoughts and experiences rather than just by answering questions and doing abstract learning activities. We must give them tasks which they are able to do rather than risk humiliating them. We have come some way from the teaching of young children. We can ask teenagers to address learning issues directly in a way that younger learners might not appreciate. We are able to discuss abstract issues with them. Indeed, part of our job is to provoke intellectual activity by helping them to be aware of contrasting ideas and concepts which they can resolve for themselves, though still with our guidance. There are many ways of studying language and practicing language skills, and most of these are appropriate for teenagers. We also have the adult learners. Adult language learners are notable for a number of special characteristics. First, they can engage with abstract thought. This suggests that we do not have to rely exclusively on activities such as games and songs, though this may be appropriate for some students. They have a whole range of experiences to draw on. They have expectations about the learning process, and they already have their own set of patterns of learning. Adults tend, on the whole, to be more disciplined than other age groups, and crucially, they are often prepared to struggle on despite boredom. They come into classroom with a rich range of experiences, which allow teachers to use a wide range of activities with them. Unlike young children and teenagers, they often have a clear understanding of why they are learning and what they want to get out of it. Many adults are able to sustain a level of motivation by holding on to a distant goal in a way that teenagers find more difficult. However, adults are never entirely problem-free learners, and they have a number of characteristics which can sometimes make learning and teaching problematic. First, they can be critical of teaching methods. Their previous learning experiences may have predisposed them to one particular methodological style, which makes them uncomfortable with unfamiliar teaching patterns. Conversely, they may be hostile to certain teaching and learning activities which replicate the teaching they received earlier in their educational careers. Second, they may have experienced failure or criticism at school, which makes them anxious and underconfident about learning a language. And the third one, many older adults worry that their intellectual powers may be diminishing with age. They are concerned to keep their creative powers alive, to maintain a sense of generativity. However, as Alan Rogers points out, this generativity is directly related to how much learning has been going on in an adult life before they can come to a new learning experience. So, good teachers of adults take all of these factors into account. They are aware that their students will often be prepared to stick with an activity for longer than younger learners, though too much boredom can obviously have a disastrous effect on motivation, as well as involving their students in more indirect learning through reading, listening, and communicative speaking and writing. They also allow them to use their intellects to learn consciously where this is appropriate. They encourage their students to use their own life experience in the learning process too. As teachers of adults, we should recognize the need to minimize the bad effects of past learning experiences. We can diminish the fear of failure by offering activities which are achievable and by paying special attention to the level of challenge presented by exercises. We need to listen to students' concerns too, and in many cases modify what we do to suit the learning tastes. Next factor, we have the learner differences. The moment we realize that a class is composed of individuals, rather than being some kind of a unified pool, we have to start thinking about how to respond to these students individually, so that while we may frequently teach the group as a whole, we will also in different ways pay attention to the different identities we are faced with. So in this section, we will look at the various ways researchers have tried to identify individual needs and behavior profiles. So aptitude and intelligence. Some students are better at learning languages than others. At least that is the generally held view. And in the 1950s and 1960s, it crystallized around the belief that it was possible to predict a student's future progress on the basis of linguistic aptitude tests. But it soon became clear that such tests were flawed in a number of ways. They didn't appear to measure anything other than general intellectual ability, even though they ostensibly looked for linguistic talents. Furthermore, they favored analytic type learners over their more holistic counterparts. So the tests were especially suited to people who have little trouble doing grammar focused tasks. Those with a more general view of things, whose analytical abilities are not so highly developed, and who receive and use language in a more message oriented way, appeared to be at a disadvantage. In fact, analytic aptitude is probably not the critical factor in success. Peter Skehan, for example, believes that what distinguishes exceptional students from the rest is that they have unusual memories, particularly for the retention of things that they hear. Another damning criticism of traditional aptitude tests is that while they may be discriminate between the most and the least intelligent students, they are less effective at distinguishing between the majority of students who fall between these two extremes. What they do accomplish is to influence the way in which both teachers and students behave. It has been suggested that students who score badly on aptitude tests will become demotivated and that and that this will then contribute to precisely the failure that the test predicted. Moreover, teachers who know that particular students have achieved high scores will be tempted to treat those students differently from students whose score was low. Aptitude tests end up being self-fulfilling prophecies, whereas it would be much better for both teacher and students to be optimistic about all of the people in the class. It is possible that people have different aptitudes for different kinds of study. However, if we consider aptitude and intelligence for learning language in general, our own experience of people we know who speak two or more languages can only support the view that learners with a wide variety of intellectual abilities can be successful language learners. This is especially true if the emphasis is on oral communication skills rather than the metalinguistic knowledge. Another line of inquiry has been tried to tease out what a good learner is. If we can narrow down a number of characteristics that all good learners share, then we can perhaps cultivate these characteristics in all our students. Neil Naiman and his colleagues included a tolerance of ambiguity as a feature of good learning, together with factors such as positive task orientation, ego involvement, high aspirations, goal orientation, and perseverance. Patsy Lightbone and Nina Spada summarized the main consensus about good learner characteristics. As they point out, the characteristics can be classified in several categories. You have motivation, intellectual abilities, learning preferences, and some such as willing to make mistakes can be considered a personality characteristic. In other words, this wish list cuts across a number of learner variables. Much of what various people have said about good learners is based on cultural assumptions which underpin much current teaching practice in Western influenced methodologies. In these cultures, we appreciate self-reliant students and promote learner autonomy as a main goal. We tend to see the tolerance of ambiguity as a goal of student development, wishing to wean our students away from a need for things to be always cut and dried. We encourage students to read texts for general understanding without stopping to look up all the words they do not understand. We ask students to speak communicatively even when they have difficulty because of words they don't know or can't pronounce. And we involve students in creative writing. In all these endeavors, we expect our students to aspire beyond their current language level. So different cultures value different learning behaviors, however. Our insistence upon one kind of good learner profile may encourage us to demand that students should act in class in certain ways. Our insistence upon one kind of good learner profile may encourage us to demand the students should act in class in certain ways, whatever their learning background. When we espouse some of the techniques mentioned above, we risk imposing a methodology on our students that is inimical to their culture. Yet, it is precisely because this is not perhaps in the best interest of the students that we discussed context sensitive methodology. Furthermore, some students may not enjoy grammar exercises, but this does not mean they are doomed to learning failure. There is nothing wrong with trying to describe good language learning behavior. Nevertheless, we need to recognize that some of our assumptions are heavily culture bound and that students can be successful even if they do not follow these characteristics to the letter. We also have learner styles and strategies. A preoccupation with learner personalities and styles has been a major factor in psycholinguistic research. Are there different kinds of learners? Are there different kinds of behavior in a group? How can we tailor our teaching to match the personalities in front of us? The methodologist Tony Wright described four different learner styles within a group. The enthusiast looks to the teacher as a point of reference and is concerned with the goals of the learning group. The oracular also focuses on the teacher but is more oriented towards the satisfaction of personal goals. The participator tends to concentrate on group goals and group solidarity. whereas the rebel, while referring to the learning group for his or her point of reference, is mainly concerned with the satisfaction of his or her own goal. Keith Wheeling, working with adult students in Australia, suggested four learner categories. So, first we have the convergers. These are students who are by nature solitary, prefer to avoid groups, and who are independent and confident in their own abilities. Most importantly, they are analytic and can impose their own structures on learning. They tend to be cool and pragmatic. Second, we have the conformists. These are students who prefer to emphasize learning about language over learning to use it. They tend to be dependent on those in authority and are perfectly happy to work in non-communicative classroom, doing what they are told. A classroom of conformists is one which prefers to see well-organized teachers. We also have the concrete learners. Though they are like conformists, they also enjoy the social aspects of learning and like to learn from direct experience. They are interested in language use and language as communication rather than language as a system. They enjoy games and group works in class. We also have the communicative learners. These are language use oriented. They are comfortable out of class and show a degree of confidence and a willingness to take risks which their colleagues may lack. They are much more interested in social interaction with other speakers of the language than they are with the analysis of how the language works. They are perfectly happy to operate without the guidance of a teacher. So Wright and Willing's categorizations are just two of a large number of descriptions that different researchers have come up with to try to explain different learner styles and strategies. Frank Caulfield, David Mosley, Elaine Hall, and Catherine Ecclestone, in an extensive study of the literature available, identify an extremely large list of opposed styles which different theories have advocated. But while this may be of considerable interest to theorists, the advice against pedagogical interaction based solely on any of the learning style instruments. It may sound as if, therefore, there is no point in reading about different learner styles at all or trying to incorporate them into our teaching. But that is not the case. We should do as much as we can to understand the individual differences within a group. We should try to find descriptions that chime with our own perceptions, and we should endeavor to teach individuals as well as groups. Next, we have the language levels. The students are generally described in three levels. We have the beginner, the intermediate, and the advanced. And these categories are further qualified by talking about real beginners and false beginners. Between beginner and intermediate, we often class students as elementary. The intermediate level itself is often subdivided into lower intermediate and upper intermediate and even mid intermediate. One version of different levels therefore has the progression as shown on your screen. These terms are used somewhat indiscriminately so that what one school calls intermediate is sometimes thought of as near elementary by others, and someone else might describe a student as advanced, despite the fact that in other institution he or she would be classed as upper intermediate. Some coherence is arrived at as a result of the general consensus that exists between publishers about what levels their courses are divided into, but even here there is some variation, often depending on different views about what students at certain levels are capable of doing. In recent years, the Council of Europe and the Association of Language Testers in Europe have been working to define language competency levels for learners of a number of different languages. The result of these efforts is the Common European Framework, a document setting out in detail what students can do at various levels. And of course, a series of ALTE levels ranging from A1, roughly equivalent to elementary level, to C2, very advanced. So the figure that you're seeing shows the different levels in sequence. The level students have reached often has an effect on their motivation. For example, students who have considerable trouble understanding and producing language at beginner levels often fail to progress to higher levels. This accounts for the relatively high dropout rate of some adult beginners. Sometimes students who arrive at, say, an intermediate level, they tend to suffer from the so-called plateau effect because for them, it is not easy to see progress in their abilities from one week to the next. And this can have a very demotivating effect. Teachers need to be sensitive to the plateau effect, taking special measures to counteract it. Such efforts may include setting achievement goals so that the students have a clear learning target to aim at, explaining what still needs to be done, making sure that activities are especially engaging, and sparking the students' interest in the more subtle distinctions of language use. Other variations in level dependent teacher behavior are important too, especially in terms of both methodology and the kind of language which we expose our students to. Among the four different learner styles described by Tony Wright, in which group do you belong? How about in Keith Willing's four learner categories?